my grandfather was one of six. He was an older brother and four sisters. And I don't know if it was all the sisters, but several of the sisters had a job in the coat factory across the street from my great-grandparents.
And where is this?
And this is in Altoona, Pennsylvania. All right, this is Altoona. Way back this is in the late 20s, not quite, I think around 30, 31, maybe. They're working at the coat factory for months. After they're working there for a couple of months, a man shows up on the doorstep of my family home, my great-grandparents' home. And the guy literally hands an envelope to my great-grandmother with $50 in it back in Prohibition and says the equivalent of, you didn't hear nothing, you didn't see nothing. Her response to that was, you're right. I didn't hear nothing. I didn't see nothing. Thanks for the money. This goes on for like 6 months. And after 6 months, there is this massive raid by law enforcement. They had created a distillery underneath the coat factory, tunneled underneath the road, and they were bringing up barrels of booze in the house next to my great-grandparents. And so for 6 months, they would show up, pay her off with cash, saying you didn't hear nothing, didn't see nothing. The entire time she's like, you're absolutely right. We have no idea. So that went on forever.
They're like, man, she's really playing her role.
She knew it. She got it. She got it. So we talked about that. And then I told him about my grandfather, who I also grew up with. When he got interested in music, he found a music teacher who would teach the accordion like a good Italian boy. And the teacher didn't have enough business up in Altoona at the time to justify coming back and forth. I mean, this is, when they were just rolling out cars. And so he used to hop a freight train to get down about 8 miles down track to the next big town, which is where the teacher was, would take his lessons, and then would hop a later freight train to get back home, until my grandfather was actually able to basically create a new line of students for this instructor, for that guy to then start coming to them in Altoona. My grandfather went out and rounded up 8-10 guys, kids who wanted to take music lessons with this guy. And that was when my grandfather was, I think, just still in his teens, early teens, probably at that. And that planted the seed for what became, my grandfather had a chain of music schools. He was in the music industry for 40 some odd years.
Oh, really?
Yeah. He had a chain of music schools called Major Music, 7 locations all across New Jersey, founded originally in Newark and Orange. That led to the founding of Sano Corp, which actually produced its own amplifiers and accordions. And on the two different sides of the business, on the amplifier side of the business, the biggest challenge that they got replaced by all the electronics when especially when Japan started mass producing everything, as well as China. And the challenge that they joked about for years with my grandfather's amplifiers was that there was no planned obsolescence. So you can actually today still find a Sano amplifier on eBay. And if you replace the vacuum tubes, that thing will sound the same as it did the day it was produced. And so that was one side of the business. The other side was the chain of music schools.
So you still today run the Sano Corp, which is a little bit of a
so now you actually know where that comes from.
Yeah,
so
now I know where it goes.
Yeah, so actually the corporation I used to house my coaching practice has been inherited, so to speak, through the family. And so the corporation that I officially use is 77 years old now, I believe.
All right. Established 77 years ago.
That's absolutely right.
You got some longevity behind you without even trying.
Exactly. And the coolest part about Major Music for me was, which was part of why I also had told the story, was that up until my grandfather's final years, where we didn't go out as much, we would go out. He loved going out to dinner. And as we would, I would say it happened at least a couple times a month that somebody from my parents' generation would come up and say, "Are you Mr. Iorio? Are you Louis Iorio?" You say, "Yeah." He goes, "Well, I took piano lessons, guitar lessons, accordion lessons from you 40 years ago, 45 years ago, 50 years ago. And I want you to know I still remember those times." Because the family atmosphere he created, not only for his faculty, but for his students, was unparalleled. And that was a lot of the seeds of entrepreneurialism in our family. And that legacy that, was crazy, but that legacy that he left is something that I've always walked with and aspire to.
Well, it sounds like it bleeds right. I was going to say, it sounds like it bleeds right into what you do.
Yeah,
well, that's awesome. The apple doesn't fall too far.
Yeah.
Are we? How are we doing?
You guys are live, episode 3.
All right, episode 3. So guys, listen, I want to introduce you to somebody who I respect and have a lot of have a lot of adornment for. He's taken his company from 8 employees and 1,500 graduates to 40 people, 80 contractors, 24 locations, and 1,500 graduates before he had his
15,000.
exit. 2,000.
15,000.
Yeah. What did I say? 1,500?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't mean to cut you short. 15,000. Before he had his exit strategy and decided to go into the new chapter of life where he's now a partner of Man on Fire. He's not only been a really good friend and a coach of mine for some time now, but we first met maybe about 8 or 9 or 10 years ago.
Yeah, probably 10. I think it's over 10 years at this point.
And I'll never forget it. I got introduced to Luke to go play some golf at his company's outing. And I get there and there's about, how many people did you have there? About 40 people?
It's probably about, yeah, that sounds about right.
About 40 people. And he says, all right, you're tied up with me. Let's go. And at the point, I was not that great at golf, but you were stroking pretty well that day.
Decent.
And we finished up the round, and you looked at me and you said, "All right, let's do some business. Have your girl set up an appointment." And I was like, "All right." And then you later asked me, "Do you know why I decided to do some business with you?" And I said, "Why was that?" And he said, "People who tend to handle themselves on the golf course in the way that you do tend to handle their business in the same way." And I respect that, and I think that. I think that ever since then we've just kind of connected and it's been a great ride. So yeah. I'm proud to introduce you, my buddy, Luke Iorio.
Well, thank you, sir. I appreciate it. Been looking forward to being here. We've been chatting about Business Unchained for a while. So I've been looking forward to being here and seeing where this conversation goes.
Yeah, dude. So I gave you a little bit of an intro, but I'd love for you to tell the story of iPEC Consulting, kind of what you did in the tenure that you were with them to change from 8 employees and 1,500 graduates to tenfolding that, because I think that the growth is a huge component of what some business owners struggle with. Yeah. Ultimately, I know that we'll talk a little bit about how that freed you up, but give us a story, dude.
Yeah. Let me give you the long and short of it, and feel free to ask me for any detail. Perfect. Obviously. Yeah. Right? So I got my start in the coaching industry back. Let's see. I first met the founder of iPEC, Bruce Schneider, in January of 2004. I know it was January of 2004 because I was just back from my honeymoon from getting married in December of 2003. And at that point, he was looking, and it was through a partner. It was actually completely through happenstance. I was doing consulting work, marketing and management consulting at the time. A partner of his had reached out saying, "We want to grow the business, but we don't know. Do we need to, market better? Do we need to manage better? Do we need different talent? Do we need to bring in money? Do we need to bring in a partner and sell part of the, what do we need to do?" Right. And the email that was sent to me was like a list of like 15, 16 something questions, all just seeking free consulting advice at that point. And for whatever reason, I had received a lot of emails like that before. Usually I don't pay them any mind because it was just looking for free advice. And I would normally delete them, but I caught coaching at the end of the URL before I hit delete. And I thought, wow, this could be pretty cool. I grew up playing sports. Maybe this is baseball, basketball, football. What is this, right? And I go out on the website and had nothing to do with what I thought. And I got very, very intrigued with what the promise of the coaching industry could be. And I'll get to that in a second. Anyhow, I replied to the email. I took the time, took about 45 minutes to go through all the questions thoroughly, sent the email back. And I don't think it was 7 minutes before my phone rang. "Can we get an appointment with you?" I show up at the first appointment, and I used to attend those initial meetings. My consulting practice started out of the work that I was originally doing with my father, who was in business brokerage. And so buying and selling of businesses, if you're not familiar with that. And so I showed up to the first meeting with Bruce and his partner, and I show up with my father, and I said, "Listen, I'm going to do most of the talking, but do me a favor, pretend that it's coming from him because he's got more gray hair." I was 2004, so I wasn't 27, I was 26 at the time. And at that moment, Bruce would tell me later, he goes, at that moment, he decided, how far can I push this kid? And he went at me for at least 90 minutes, just anything he could. He was throwing scenarios and questions and everything else. And he and I just kind of, so to speak, stood toe to toe and went back and forth and had this really wonderful conversation about his business. And it led to, ultimately, I was working for them, doing some consulting, figuring out what was going to be the right path for them to be able to grow the industry and grow in the industry and grow the business. And at the end of that period of time, simultaneously, I jumped into the field of coaching to take the training program because I knew that it answered some questions, again, I'll get to that in a second, that I had about the work I was doing with entrepreneurs. And so I jumped into the training program. I started consulting for them. And at the end of that first, about 18 months, he made me the proverbial offer that I couldn't refuse. And so a quick word about what I was alluding to in terms of coaching and what I found was that when I was consulting for entrepreneurs and small business owners, I focused predominantly on service-based businesses. They were usually somewhere between $1 million and $10 million in revenue. And I could have two businesses in the exact same field, like both HVAC companies, for instance, as an example, and similar resources, similar staff, similar talent, similar experience. And one of those companies would just absolutely go out and crush it, and the other would just spin and chase their tail over and over and over again. Regardless of resources, plan, strategy, like it's all there, but one would spin out, one wouldn't. And so I started to get really curious about what was going on, and coaching helped me answer those questions, which was that the business was a reflection of the entrepreneur. It was a reflection of what was going on and the level of growth that entrepreneur had achieved or was focused on for themselves. And so I recognized that the entrepreneurs that were significantly more successful, they were much more self-empowered, meaning they were not waiting for anybody else to do anything. They were the ones who were saying, okay, I'm the one who has to make the choice. I'm going to lean in. I'm not waiting for things to be perfect. I'm going to start creating whatever it is I want to create. I'm not going to sit back. So there was a proactiveness about it, but it was a very empowered proactiveness in the way they went about it. They were also very self-engaged. Same idea. They weren't waiting to say, how engaged am I by this situation? How much do I like this situation? Instead, they were thinking, how is it that I am going to create the type of energy, passion, joy, gratitude, et cetera, that I want to experience in this given moment, in this given part of my business? So they would engage in that regard. And they took a huge degree of ownership over everything. So that was one of the most glaring to me, was that if I helped a company come up with a new marketing strategy, let's say, that needed to be deployed, the owners that would roll up their sleeves, dive into the middle of that plan until they could feel like, this is my plan. Those were always the ones that were significantly more successful than the ones who were like, yeah, I kind of like this plan, implement it for me. Because the level of buy-in and the level of ownership of what they were doing was completely different, right? So anyway, coaching answered that for me. I jump into the training. I join iPEC full-time. I start running marketing for them immediately because that was my primary background. I start running admissions for them pretty quickly. In a very short period of time, in a brief period of time, I'm running operations. A couple of years later, I'm the president of this school. And then right after that, I was the CEO of the company. And I was the first CEO to take over for the founder, CEO for just shy of 7 years, and with the company for a total of 17 years, I believe, was the final tally when I had the exit from the company. And we can go into, whatever of that journey that you would like, but I did, the fun part about the journey for me was that I was the guy that was showing up at the trade shows, setting up the booth, and, throwing everything out and throwing the boxes out and like doing all the breakdown. I was a guy that was running microphones at some of our major, like our graduate level events, and even having certain students ask to talk to somebody in charge. And at the time I was the CEO of the company. They had no idea the way that I was approaching, the way I approached everything was just, you do the work that needs being done. You dive into it. Don't attach yourself to your ego, and show the level of care that you want the people to feel in the experience that they're having. And I used to get a kick out of the fact that most of the time, a lot of students for a while had no idea who I was, and would look to go, quote unquote, above my head if they needed something, which is, I absolutely enjoyed.
Well, so you 10x the business, right? In a time when, what was the environment in terms of business owners and the acceptance of them getting coaches at that point in time? Were they as receptive as they are today, or
totally different? It was, if as soon as I would mention that I was a coach or I was in the field of coaching, training coaches, it was, oh, cool, great. Which sport? What sports do you guys focus on? It's like, no, coaching, like life coaching, executive coaching, business coaching. You're like, great. What's that? It's like consulting. I'm like, not really. And so we spent a lot of time on helping people understand even just what coaching was, because at that point, it was not something that was very, very well known. And ironically, it was also, though, the places it was known were your top athletes, your top executives, your top CEOs. They were the ones that were seeking out executive coaching and leadership coaching, business coaching, et cetera. So, top flying entrepreneurs. because they recognized that this was a way of them consistently focusing on their development and growth. And the more that they would grow themselves, the more that their business would end up reflecting that over and over and over again. So at that time, there was not the level of understanding of what coaching was at all. It was, we needed to kind of make or support making that market. We were not alone. We were one of at that time when I joined, we were one of 12 to 14 major schools in the accredited schools in the industry. Now there's a tremendous amount more than that, but there was about somewhere in that 12 to 14 range. And the interesting thing, I guess I would say, is which changed our growth in that process was probably the greatest thing to happen to us was the market crash at the end of 2008. And it was funny because interesting. It was 45 days to 60 days after the crash in 2008 was terrifying. Phones stopped ringing, emails stopped coming in. Like, we were even talking about, okay, what does a downsize plan have to look like? We were very worried. And then all of a sudden the phone started ringing and they never stopped.
So who was calling you? Because if you look at just the idea of coaching, to some point the world was your oyster because not a lot of people were involved in actually hiring coaches. But at the same time, you have to deal with that business owner ego of, I can figure this out. I don't need a coach.
Right. It was a major growth moment for the industry. I think some of the things that changed, and I think this is what shifted or was beginning, and I don't know the documented of exactly when this began, but to me, energetically, what it felt like was that sometime after the market crashed in 2008 and everything went from high flying to, oh my God, how am I going to pull this together again? To me, that's what spurred the launch of the gig economy in a completely different way. And so now people wanted to have a second income. They wanted to have something to fall back on. They wanted to be able to freelance. They also were starting to recognize that it's
some
not
sense of security, like control your own
security
destiny sort of feeling.
That was part of it. And I also think that was the beginning of, and it's accelerated ever since, I think that was the beginning of a lot of people looking around and saying, we just went through this period of time where it was all about achievement and the next payday and bringing in more money, et cetera. And it just collapsed. And now I don't have that same level of financial security, but I also still have no purpose. I don't have a sense of fulfillment.
I love what you talk about with fulfillment. And you and I have done a lot of work with talking about, finding that fulfillment.
Right.
But, what I'd love to do is touch upon that a little later on, maybe come back to talk a little bit about, you had this industry that you knew had an opportunity to explode. You obviously pivoted your career to really focus and drive this thing. We know at the end of the day, being the Monday morning quarterback, we look back and you 10X the business. What are some of the things from that moment on, as you started to see that growth, that really made the difference that you were able to incorporate into the business?
So there were, let's do that from the business standpoint, and then we'll talk about the personal side. On the business standpoint,
well, the personal side's a totally different thing.
It's going to get into something different.
I think that's even better because we get into what you're doing now.
Yeah, we're going to get
the
there.
business.
We'll get there. We'll do the business first. So there's a lot of things, but let me name a few. Number one was that from a strategy standpoint, especially because this was a relatively new or emerging industry and profession, we recognized very early on that we wanted to be a standard bearer inside of the industry. And that's even the way that we built out our curriculum and everything else, meaning we wanted it at the highest quality, the highest standard that we could possibly
gold
set.
standard. You wanted the
gold standard.
You graduate from here and you are the cream of the crop.
That's it. It was not going to be, get certified in a weekend. This was not going to be, a quick way to get through something. This was, we wanted you coming through as if this was the Ivy League of coach training schools, and you were going to feel like you were at that level. And part of that meant not only did our program need to back that, but we also needed to engage our marketing and our messaging around how do we educate people on what does it actually take to be both a masterful and a successful coach. And these are the things that you've got to look for if that's what you want out of your career.
How did you come up to that?
Well, that was the experience that partly my founder had, my partner, partly some of the key trainers had, myself and a few others. As we went through the growth of the industry, we kept coming up with, on the masterful side of things, we really started to develop our own models, and that was part of the founding of the school, was this is what it takes to create sustainable change in somebody. And so if you're going to create sustainable change, you've got to approach it in certain manners and certain methodologies need to be included in that process, or otherwise somebody can make a change, but it's only going to be temporary, or it's only going to make a circumstantial difference in their life. if you want it to make a substantial as well as sustainable difference in their life, then it's got to have certain, principles, policies, and factors included inside of it, or it's just going to revert back. Somebody's going to fall back on whatever the gold patterns
stuff
have to
that
be.
they can anchor to, that they can relate to on an ongoing basis, not something that's like a Band-Aid fix.
Correct. And so part of that meant that we needed to understand the psychology of it. We needed to know the adult learning theory behind it. We needed to know the idea of change management and change leadership. We needed to know how, personal change. So there was consciousness growth, self-awareness growth. There were all sorts of different factors, methodologies, modalities that were brought to bear to say this is the most successful, sustainable, and substantial way to create change. So we built a program, and we built all of our programming, our training methodologies, our coaching methodologies off of that level of understanding to create a standard for this is what it means to be masterful in what you do. Then we had to create the successful side of that, meaning what are the best business practices and professional practices that allow you to grow your coaching business in a way that you're here for the long haul, you're here 20 years later, 30 years later, not you made a career for 6 months, a year, and you're out of the industry. And so similarly, we went out and we worked with some of the most successful coaches that were out there, some of the most successful entrepreneurs in professional services spaces. And we actually started building in business development curriculum directly into what we were doing.
So you're talking about like two different models, one where you get certified and then one where you continue to grow your business.
Correct.
Gotcha. Okay.
So we knew that was the standard that we wanted to set. So that was a big piece of kind of a bedrock of who we were, was how was it that we were going to set the standard so that it was clear that we were the preeminent coach training organization in the industry. That was number one. Number two was that we owned we'd owned our authenticity. What I mean by that is that there were a lot of schools that simply wanted to say, hey, come to us, we'll teach you how to coach. And it was what I would call almost a very bland or secularized version of coaching, where there was nothing really deeply proprietary, unique. It was not based on a value structure. It was not based on a philosophy per se. And so they just did the bare basics of here's your competencies, here's your skills, here, go out and coach. We took a very different approach. And we said, no, the heart of who we are as an organization, our mission was to raise the consciousness of the world one person at a time. We happen to choose to do that through coach training. And so our coaching, the methodology that was developed by our founder and then through the school, was a consciousness-based model. It was part of who we were. It's part of what we knew created the most successful change for individuals. And so we leaned into what was it that was truly authentic, truly unique about who we were, and we didn't hide it. We put that out front and center. We let everybody know this is what we stand for, and this is who we are, and this is how we believe things will change the best and will support you most as a coach as well as a client. So we leaned into the truth of who we were. The other part of that was that we had certain values and principles that were inherent in the way that we coached, but they were inherent in the way that we did business as well. And so many organizations, they'll put up their, 5 values, top values or whatever for the organization, and they'll have that word or maybe that phrase that pins out there. We actually took the time to write out those values, write full understanding of what those looked like in action, meaning that if we are living this value, this is how someone else is going to know that we're living that value, because this is the way that we're approaching things. These are the conversations we're having. These are the behaviors you can witness. These are the way we're approaching these situations, so that everybody understood how our values were a living and breathing aspect of who it was that we were.
So that was like driving the culture of iPEC that you would hope to then leach over to your students / clients that were engaging. Is that?
It is. And it wasn't even a leach over. It was it was very intentional. Connecting all of those dots we didn't want to take any of that for granted. So we trained on our values. We trained on the behaviors and the communication style and decision-making that matched our values. So
was this like a grand vision that you guys were like, this is the vision we're heading to? Or how did that evolve from where you were when you walked through the door to when you got there?
That was completely found almost always by accident. We didn't know what we were doing. We never did. We always paid attention to what was happening in front of us at any given time and looking for the inspiration, looking for the insights as they came. I'd love to, anybody that tells you that, I was this grand master strategist and I had it all figured out and we achieved everything we wanted to do in 10 years. I can't say that I have found many of them that I would believe.
Well, I love that you say that, because I remember the first time that I met Bruce.
Yeah.
And we got into a little bit of a heart to heart in terms of how he started the business.
Yep.
And he had said,
yeah,
I had no idea.
Yeah.
I went and I started to sell this idea, and then all of a sudden people wanted the idea, and I was like, oh my God, I have to put a curriculum together.
That's the start of what happened. And it leads me to the two other things. One was the more that we got, whenever we would get ourselves too locked into this is how things need to look, this is the vision, this is the plan, this is where we're going. If we got too locked into that, then we started to try to force things to happen a certain way, and we stopped paying attention to what's changing in the business, in the market, in our customers, clients, et cetera. And the less attached we were, where we say, listen, we have a plan and we have a direction that we're heading in, and all things being equal, that's where we're going to go. But we're also going to do it with our eyes wide open, our heads up, and we're going to keep looking around for feedback that's coming in, because we may be receiving signs and feedback and input and data that is trying to course correct us in the way that we go. So we couldn't be too attached to what we were trying to do. And part of what that led to as well was that how did we excel the way that we did? We changed our program, our processes, everything about who we were. We would challenge the heck out of anything we were doing about every 24 to 36 months at a maximum. So we were always pushing, how do we create more, innovate more, evolve more, grow more? How do we not rest on our laurels as to what we've achieved at this point? And instead, if we want to be the standard bearer, that means that we have to consistently raise the standard and be ahead of what everybody else is doing. So we would very often be one of the only schools that would roll out things new probably every 24 months. And then it would take a lot of the industry 24 months to catch up to us, and we were already rolling out the next thing.
So how do you know the difference? I mean, we all know the story about the guy who was 3 feet from gold, gave up, sold it, and then the next guy came in and found all the gold, right? That's the old tale.
Yeah.
How do you know as a business owner when you are course correcting for the betterment of the business, or you're just giving up at the wrong time?
So two different ways of kind of considering this. First is that there's the guy that gave up 3 feet from gold, right? Then there's a guy that went bankrupt because he never changed direction. Right. So we have escalation of commitment as well, where we're throwing good money after bad. And I'll be honest, I see a lot of business owners do that probably even more often than they give up on themselves too early. Now, in either instance, there's no black and white, there's no cut and dry answer here. This is, to me, where we need to develop certain personal skills that are not taught inside of a business school or what have you, because this is where you actually need to start learning how to listen properly to your intuition. And what I mean specifically by that is that when we can listen to our intuition, it means that we're listening to that deeper voice inside of ourselves that does not have an agenda, that doesn't have any attachments. So it's free to say, we're going to completely change directions, or we know you really want to give up right now, but keep going. There is that quiet voice that exists inside of all of us. The challenge is it's underneath the inner critic. It's underneath our ego. It's underneath our attachments. It's underneath what everybody else thinks we should be doing, our own personal judgments. And that's where, to me, a lot of the work of coaching comes in, is how do we start to clear away all of those things that keep us locked in certain patterns and have us listening to the part that still wants to prove himself or herself. The part of us that's wrestling with our ego usually gets in the way of that deeper voice that's trying to say, hey, just a little further, or hey, it's no longer in front of you, it's to the left. But we've got to be able to get in touch with that part of who we are as a business owner and as a leader, because that's actually where we're receiving our greatest guidance from. But it's buried underneath everything else.
And I'd love for you to weigh in here. I was just talking to somebody, and we were talking about just the gut feeling.
Yeah.
Right. And somebody said to me, how do you know how to read your gut? Like, what does that mean? Like, explain to me what your gut emotion is. And it's just I think it's just that, right? It's that energy that you're connecting to at the time where you just go like, this is the right thing to do.
Yeah. You feel a certain resonance and congruence in those messages. It's almost like you get this insight, or you get this message that seems to be whispered to you from inside of you. And it may even be a little bit confusing or surprising when it first comes up. That's actually, to me, a really good sign, because if it's purely like, oh, of course, that's the next step, that's logical, probably not coming from your intuition, probably coming from your head, right? And so it usually is more of that message that seems to come a little bit out of left field. And yet it just feels resonant. It feels congruent. It feels like there's an element of truth to whatever it is that came up. That's a feeling more than it is something that you can intellectualize. If you can intellectualize it, if you can understand it logically, probably not the guidance you're looking for.
Well, that's a
challenge to most entrepreneurs, right? I mean, most entrepreneurs, it's like, but that's what got me here. That's what got me to many of the places that I went, was like, I was really good at school. I was really good at using my intellect. I was really good at figuring things out. And I needed to know when to lay those tools down and pay attention to what the hell was going on at any given time.
But it's interesting you say, because you strip out that ego, and there were a couple of other characteristics that you had, inner characteristics that you had mentioned of stripping out, because those are usually the moments when you're throwing good money after bad.
Correct.
Is when you're trying to prove yourself to somebody, or you're trying to prove yourself to yourself, or you're not going to let something fail just for the sake of having it fail, when maybe the right thing is to let it fail because it's teaching you another lesson closer to success. Or
absolutely. One of many business owners are certainly going to understand this. One of my greatest strengths was also my greatest Achilles heel. I could make anything work. If you give me enough time and resources, I will figure out a way. The challenge is I never stopped usually to ask myself, should I?
So I want you to dig a little deeper into that, because I think that's a great moment to talk about your successes and what you really took out of the sale of iPEC and moving into your new journey, which now has led to some of the Man on Fire and the additional work that you've been doing.
Yeah.
Talk to us about that.
So there's a lot of personal and business stuff wrapped up in that part of the story. So I'll try to keep this brief. I knew probably close to 4.5 years before I exited the company that I was supposed to exit the company. And I fought it for 4.5 years for all sorts of reasons. When you feel like you've been, this was my dream, right? I became an entrepreneur and a CEO in my early 30s, and everything was going phenomenal. We grew this company to be one of the most reputed inside of the industry, incredible financial success, incredible personal accolades, where it was really, I could have sat there for a long time and been really comfortable.
Well, the recognition that you got definitely
phenomenal.
It felt good on the ego.
Felt great. The ego loved it. Are you kidding me? Made things really comfortable and really sweet, right? And then to start receiving these messages like, maybe you're not supposed to be here anymore. Maybe there's a different path for you. I fought that like you wouldn't believe. And so
where did you feel those messages come from? What was the...
One was I felt it. It was a gut instinct, but it felt like a pit in my stomach. It would come up in quiet moments, which is why I usually try to keep myself so damn busy, was that I didn't want to listen to some of the messages that were coming through. So I kept myself distracted.
Now, was that like muscle through it? Like you could do it, just
muscle through it.
You got it.
Keep going. Why would you even consider walking away from this? Because that's where almost, and I know this sounds a little odd, but it's almost where your survival instincts start to kick in. Meaning to walk away from this means that, you're going to put yourself at risk. You're going to put your family at risk. You're going to effectively put your identity, your ego at risk. How are people going to know you if you walk away from this? What are people going to think that if you are at the top of literally the top of your career, you're not even 40 yet, and you've got this running and it's a purpose-based organization, you're going to walk away from it? What's wrong with you?
Just got 40 under 40, I'm sure, at that point.
Exactly,
too, right?
40 under 40, right?
A little recognition there.
And there was even the part of me, which was a big struggle, something we can talk further about, was how am I, as the CEO of this organization that supports helping people in the way that I help people and our organization helps people, how am I going to admit that I'm going through a crisis of identity and a crisis of purpose and a crisis of meaning and knowing what it is that I want to do in my life? Who do I go talk to? And if I don't go talk to them and I walk around with this, I feel like a fraud. I feel like an imposter. And I was carrying all of that with no idea of how to wrestle with it. All while also then judging myself by saying, you are so unbelievably ungrateful. Look at the position you're in. You're seriously going to complain about, it just doesn't feel as purposeful as it used to.
Tons of head trash.
Right?
Yeah,
tons of head trash. Like, who are you? Right? And there was so much that was wrapped up in that I pushed through. I tried new endeavors. We tried to bring in new initiatives, and nothing really truly clicked. Nothing flopped per se, but nothing, it was not the same. Like there was not the energy behind it. It didn't take off. It didn't necessarily go anywhere with any of the new efforts that we really were kicking in. And so I finally had to come to grips with the fact that, okay, this is not meant to be what it is. And the company still was growing. The coach training side of the business was still doing phenomenal. And we were lucky enough that, we were approached all the time by institutional money. And we finally decided to entertain those conversations.
Was there a straw that broke the camel's back? Was there a moment in time that you could, you can kind of reflect back to and say, that was it?
Yeah.
What was that?
It's gonna be a different story than your podcast is used to hearing, but where that journey came in, which was really truly the moment that I recognized I was entering into a stage of full burnout, was that this was at the tail end of a year where I had just gone to 4 funerals in 10 months. The last 2 were deeply, 2 of the 4 were expected, 2 of the 4 were not expected. The last 2, one was of a gentleman, friend of the family, who was in his early 40s. And when he passed away, he left behind 3 young girls, one of which is the same age as my daughter. And it was probably the most excruciating funeral I've ever been to. Just ripped the hearts out of everybody that was there. That left a deep mark because it was so close to home for me at that moment. A couple of months later, somebody who had been a little bit of a role model in my life and close to the family for a long time passed away. And at his funeral, actually I should say just before we go to his funeral the same day, I'm talking to my business partner, Bruce, at the time about a project that was really struggling, just not going well. And he stops me in the middle of updating him. He goes, "What's going on? Like, where are you right now?" And I said, "I'm going to another funeral today." And he stopped me. He's like, "God," he's like, because he had known just everything that was going on. He's like, "God, what's, okay, this can wait. Like, we'll talk about this, in a week. It's not that important, even though it's a big project. Doesn't matter, whatever." We chat for a little bit. And he said, "Listen," he goes, "we need to chat when you're back because you're displaying like all the classic signs of burnout." And it was the first time that somebody had articulated it out loud to me, even though I knew what was going on. I had not allowed myself to admit what was going on. So anyway, we go to the funeral. It was a very touching service, very emotional service. And afterwards, his son had eulogized him and so perfectly and described him so well that everybody around the room was like, "Yeah, that's who John was. That's exactly who he was." And when, I find myself thinking like, is that how people know me that well? That the way that they would know me is also how I knew myself? Would that be that congruent?
That had to rock you a bit to the core, no?
So I get home.
Just thinking about it right now, I'm starting to get those emotions.
So my wife drops me home. She had to do some running around before picking up the kids from school. And I am not a few steps into my kitchen, walking in through the little entry hall into the kitchen. And I dropped to the floor, sobbing. Uncontrolled amounts of emotion and tears just coming out of me that I had held on to for years. And I don't even know where it came from. It's just everything started unloading. And after, I honestly don't know exactly how long, I do the very, very stereotypical headstrong man thing. I want to go clean myself up. I don't want my kids to see me this way. So I pick myself up off the floor, go upstairs, and I get changed. And after I get changed, I go over to the bathroom sink to splash some water on my face. And as I splash water on my face, I look up into the mirror and I make contact in my eyes with a part of me that I feel like I hadn't seen in a really long time. And it was like everything faded away and I'm looking at that deepest part, that consciousness of who I am. And what happened next was that I just felt this overwhelming sense of energy start to rise in me. And as I started feeling it, literally coming up from my feet through my core and all the way up. And as it got to my throat, I recognized the energy that had risen in me was rage. And I shouted into the mirror, "Where did you go? How could you leave me?" Because I felt like I was completely and utterly betrayed by that deepest part of me. Like, where the F did you go? I cannot believe you've left me in this state and I feel fucking empty. And to this day, what I also recognize, and those that are paying attention to this real closely, was the humor of this moment. Because when you shout into a mirror, it comes right back at you. And what's interesting was that I don't hear those questions shouted at me. I hear them almost whispered of, "Where did you go? Why did you leave me?" And in that moment, everything came flooding back of this journey that we all go on, where it's like, we've got to go prove ourselves to the world. We've got to go make our mark. We've got to go provide. And in doing so, we tend to leave the truth of who it is that we are, the deepest sense, the essence of what it is that we are as human beings, and of each of us individually as souls. And I made a commitment there to that mirror. And honestly, on that bathroom floor, as I was crying again, was that I was going to spend the rest of my life trying to get back to that state of who it is that I really am. And so that's been my journey since that was the turning point, where I did only about 2 weeks later meet with my most active 2 business partners, the founder and one other. And I said, this is the beginning of the wind down. And I'm going to, it's time for me to step down as CEO. We had started to bring some people in place that would likely take over for me, but we were still figuring that out. And I had indicated to them, listen, we've got to do some restructuring, and we've got some things that we need to have handled. I can do that on my own, or we can spend some money and bring in some of the talent that we really truly need to do this, and we'll do it with them. I said, if I do it on my own, 12 to 24 months, there will be no blood in the stone. I'm done. Like, I'm done. I'm just walking out. If I do this with a team, we'll see how long it goes. I did it with a team, thank God, because they backed me, very quickly on that. And one of the individuals we were bringing in turned out to now be the CEO of the organization. She's doing a wonderful job, but it created that transition where I needed to admit to myself that I'm no longer the same person that I was at that point 14 years prior to when I had joined the company, and that I was no longer the same person. I was now on a different journey. And so that created the catalyst for me to not only ultimately exit the company. What I didn't know was that was also planting the seeds of what it is that I was going to come to do, which is now working with the organization Man on Fire, where I'm a partner. And it's an organization that's devoted to restoring masculine leadership, mature, modern masculine leadership back in men. I've had this conversation on a lot of different podcasts before, a little bit different than I know the focus of your show, but there's a lot of men that are out there right now that are hurting very, very badly. And as part of the pains and the wounds and whatnot that they carry, it is showing up in masculine leadership in very imbalanced, unhealthy ways. And we see that played out in a lot of different ways. And some of the imagery and some of the examples that have been, perpetrated through the media and everything else for the past 30, 40, 50, 60 years have not served that as well. There's a lot of also great, not only research, but great documentaries on what has been going on with masculinity for a long time.
Well, I want you to get into that, yeah. but before we get into that, I want to talk a little bit about burnout, because burnout is real. I mean, I think that if you're running your own business, you're going to come to some point of burnout before you start to realize something's got to change. Yeah. And, you can go, I mean, I know myself, I've been in and out of burnout. It's, the longer recovery times just keep happening in between each burnout. What do you advise to guys who are, or even women who are going through this, where they're running a business, they're in the trenches, they're knee deep in the proverbial shit. Yep. They're rocking and rolling, and they're fading, and then they rock and roll, and then they fade. Yeah. How do they get out of that perpetual cycle? What are some things that from your experience is a good way to not only self-identify, but then take the right moves to correct?
So a couple of things. Number one is to understand that burnout is multifaceted, meaning it's physical, it's emotional, it's mental, it's spiritual. It's across the board. It involves everything about who it is that we are. And so
you're literally drained.
You're drained. You're drained. You're burnt up.
No more gas in the tank.
There's nothing there. And it's not, I know a lot of people who have approached this from a physical standpoint. Physical is actually where it ultimately shows up, but it begins at a spiritual, mental, emotional level before the physical ever catches up to that point. So it's been going on a lot longer than you've actually felt it. What I mostly recommend is first and foremost is trying to move as close to a level of simplicity as you possibly can, so that you are finding ways to take more and more things off of your calendar. I get it. We're busy. We got to provide. We've got families. We've got spouses, whatever. I understand there's a lot of different things. And I'm not saying this is easy, but it's finding what are the things that I can simplify inside of my life.
Well, it's also some of the steps to creating that, that self-managed business of, all right, how do I extract myself out of doing everything to just finding the things that actually bring me the positive energy? And
that's part of it,
right?
That's part of it. That's part of it. And it's finding some of that simplicity and simplifying. But the reason why that you're doing it at this particular stage is that you have got to be able to create some space to create a container for yourself to then do the work that needs to be done. And usually the very first stage of that work is literally giving yourself a place and time to feel all the stuff that you've been stuffing down for years. Mm-hmm. That's usually the beginning of the burnout, is that there have been stuff that has been chasing you for a long time, and you just got really, really good at compartmentalizing it, at staying ahead of it, at not looking at it. And now all of a sudden it's like, oh, I piled way too much stuff under the carpet. I can't get around it anymore. I got to face it. Well, that's what burnout is. Like, that's where burnout starts.
And that's where you and I started to get into some heavy work, because I was doing the hiring and trying to find the right people and put the right people on the bus and make sure they're in the right seat and take more of the things that are draining from me. But it goes also a lot deeper than just what's going on in the day-to-day of the business that brought you to what you feel was the ultimate burnout.
Yeah.
It's there's a lot of correction.
There is. It's to be clear that it's not just circumstantial, right? So we can't just manage new circumstances, because then if we manage it circumstantially, you always have to manage it there's no getting out of that, right? It's not fixed. You are always then trying to manage and control the circumstances so that they line up just right. Well, everybody knows that's crap. That's not going to work. It's going to catch up to you. So you've got to ultimately turn within. So the key was to find the things that you can do to create more simplicity to whatever degree you can, even if it's just a half an hour a week. Like, if that's where it begins, that's where it begins. And then maybe you can grow it to an hour or two a week. But then using that time to create a container, a space for yourself to really start to turn and look at the things that are actually going on. And, part of that may be, I don't even want to say that it's like developing meditation practice or anything else, because that's also still just behavioral. It means that, get yourself into a support circle, get yourself with a coach, get yourself with a therapist, get yourself with someone who's going to be able to help you craft the space, the container for you to do the work to understand what's actually going on for you right now.
Yeah. For me, it was, I want judgment free, right?
Yep.
You want to do it with not your best friend, not your spouse, but somebody who's not going to pass judgment or bring it up later in a conversation that's going to hold it over your head or against you.
And it's both judgment free, as well as when you go to somebody who can hold that kind of space for you, you're going to somebody who doesn't already have a relationship with you that's a preconceived notion of who you should be.
That's important.
You're going to somebody who is completely free of any of those attachments and has no relational attachment to needing you to be a certain way. Like, listen, I'm all for, I've got a wonderful relationship, thank God, with my wife. We talk to each other about all sorts of things. And she needs me to be certain things, and I need her to be certain things. And those expectations will never get out of the way. So, I'm not going to coach my wife and she's not going to coach me. It's not going to go well, right?
That will not go well.
So we've got to be free of that. So it is going to someone who can hold that kind of space for you, who is a professional of some kind. It doesn't have to be a therapist, doesn't have to be a coach, but a practitioner who knows how to create that type of space, whether it be through circles, whether it be through group-based work, whether it be through retreats and seminars and teaching and everything else, many different ways to be able to get the support. But we do need that support, and we've got to create the container so we can go through that process.
I love it.
And the last part of it, I will add, is take the long view. This is something that is not innate to where society is right now. It's, okay, I'm going to a retreat this weekend for 3 days, and on Monday, I'm going to be fixed. Not going to happen. You may feel great for a couple of weeks, maybe even a whole month, and then all of your crap will find you again, because you changed your state, but you didn't change your stage. And this work is really truly about, how do you lean in to change the stage of awareness, the stage of consciousness, the stage of growth that you're actually in. And that does take time. It took us 3 decades, 4 decades, 5 decades to create these conditions.
Yeah.
Not going to change in 3 days. So you want to be able to take a look at, how can I create almost a cocoon for myself? Even, like I said, even if it's only a half an hour a week or an hour a week, how do I create that cocoon for myself so that I can go in, do the work that I need to do? And when I reemerge, I'm reemerging with this new sense of revitalization, this new aliveness, this new purpose in who it is that I am.
So let's kind of bring this to a full close with Man on Fire, because I want to learn a little bit more. If you could briefly kind of get into that masculinity concept, because I know there's a lot of conflict or controversy around toxic masculinity. So would love for you to just talk a little bit about that and Man on Fire, and what are the type of guys that you are seeing are are experiencing and looking for this kind of an experience journey?
I think the first thing I want to share is that I actually think a lot of harm has been done by the phrase toxic masculinity. And I say that because it creates a label that makes something other than what it actually is. It also creates distance between us and what's going on. And so it also dehumanizes a lot of the men that are going through these types of circumstances. And so the reason why I share that is because what we're witnessing is either unhealthy or imbalanced masculinity, meaning that when any individual, take it even out of the masculine for a moment, if any individual has gone through certain experiences in their life that create certain wounding, certain hurts, certain pains, and those go unfaced, they do not go resolved. And nobody wants to face them. Not only the individual doesn't, but nobody around them wants to face it. It just keeps getting perpetuated over and over and over again. We develop very unhealthy ways of coping with the pain that is there. It's one of the most beautiful quotes that I just thoroughly love that reminds us more of what's going on, which is Gabor Mate, where he did a very famous psychotherapist. He's incredible in terms of his understanding of the mind-body connection, did a tremendous amount of his work with some of the most addicted inside of society. And he says and reminds us, don't ask why the addiction, ask why the pain. That's actually what's the question behind anything to do with what has been termed toxic masculinity. Don't ask why the toxicity, ask why the pain. And so I bring that up because that's a problem, again, not even just on masculinity, it's a problem across every facet of society right now. We are a society that believes that we shouldn't experience pain. We are a society that believes that we shouldn't experience discomfort, that we should always have comfort. And then we've got all of these unbelievable technologies that have been developed to do nothing more than distract us and disconnect us from the truth of who we are and the truth of what we're experiencing. We need to get back to turning around and facing and feeling all the challenges that we've been bottling up to this point. So now I specifically apply that to what's going on with men and with their growth inside of their masculinity, because we want men to be able to get to a point where they can serve in the masculine leadership that they were born to be, that when they take that final breath on this earth, they're taking it from a place of freedom. They've given and loved and been the fullness of who they actually are.
Where are they before they go to Man on Fire, and what do they become through the process?
A lot of different.
What is the process?
Yeah, so a lot of different circumstances that come in. It can be some are coming in because things mounted to the point where life has thrown them some level of crisis. That crisis could be relationship, it could be health, it could be career, where they've turned around and said, I now have to look at what's going on for real. I've hid from this for too long. There's another wave of men that are coming in very similar to me, where they'd hit a point inside of their career, which is where we're usually, quote unquote, groomed to excel and to learn how to provide from. And they get to a certain level of success and they look around, they're like, I checked all the boxes and I'm not happy. I'm not fulfilled. I'm completely stressed out. So that stress is usually being taken out on my most, intimate, closest relationship. And so my relationship isn't where I want it to be because I'm not showing up as the man that I wish I could show up for my partner. And so, even though they've got all of this success on the outside, there's this recognition that they feel alone and they feel empty.
Yeah.
I remember in the middle of going through what I was going through, I could be in a room full of friends that you well know, and feel like I was completely and utterly alone. And these are friends I've had for 20, 30 years. And I still felt alone because that's just the experience of what I felt like I was going through at that time. So anyway, we have men that go through a lot of those different types of circumstances. When they come in, the processes that we use are grounded in a lot of things. Number one for men, which is absolutely critical, is that when a man needs to go through any type of change process, it's got to be somatic, meaning it's got to be connected to the body. Why? Because our challenge is not figuring things out. Matter of fact, we go to our heads largely and predominantly because that's where we don't have to feel. We can go and retreat here and we can start to figure out, okay, I can make sense of this and I can try to make sense of that. And all that is a form of disconnection so that we don't actually have to feel what's coming up inside of us so that we disconnect from our emotions, right? And that's reinforced in us in many different ways throughout our kind of growing up process.
Well, I mean, even just the joke of going home and, wife having a complaint about something, and our first, the joke is men's first move is to solve the problem.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily the problem that needs to be solved. It just needs to be the emotional connection to your spouse.
Getting into the emotional connection. But, if we walk it all the way back, How often did we as boys hear that phrase, man up? When you're a kid on the playground and something happens where you want to cry because something just really, really hurt, either physically or emotionally, something happened. Man up, toughen up, kid, suck it up. We're told all the time, and we're told that repeatedly. And then when we get into our first couple of jobs and things start to become overwhelming, push through it, suck it up, get it done. How often have we heard there's no room for emotions in business? There's no room for feelings.
All the time. I mean, that was over what it was.
And over again, right? So for us, we quite literally need to learn how to feel again. And the only way you can do that is you've got to get into your body. It's got to be a somatically based process.
Okay.
Second part of it is also understanding that there are many different facets to our consciousness, meaning our level of awareness, how we relate to what we're going through in our lives. We can do that from a place of suffering. We can do it from a place of polarity or conflict. We can do it from a place of feeling stuck. We can do it from places that are empowered. We can do it from places where we see through the perceptions, the illusions. So there's all these different levels or tiers or elements of consciousness that are true and apparent in us at all times. And we're not all one. We cycle through all of these different things at different phases and different situations in our life. So the next part is having a map, having an understanding that helps us understand how we're relating to someone or relating to the circumstances of our life so that we can get a map of the territory at any given time, right? Another element of the process, and I'm not going to keep going, but I'll name one other that's a critical part of the process, is that it needs to be relational. Meaning that if you have this wonderful insight, right, and you all of a sudden you've got this great knowledge and information, that's not transformation. It needs to be in the body, and it needs to be something that you can express in connection with somebody else. When all of a sudden you've got something that is insight, and it drops into the body where you can actually feel it, you know it, and you can share it from that place with another person, that's when you've actually started to create change and really understand the wisdom that's been given to you. But if you're not going through at least those, and there are many other facets to this, but if you're not getting at least that, then you're not going to get the type of change that really is truly there. So anyway, those are three of many elements.
So what's the duration of the experience if you're going through a Man on Fire program?
A lot of men, they do start with coming to us for one of our initial programs, whether it be a 90-day online coaching program. Others are coming for a more immersive experience that is a program that is anchored by a 4-day event. And then there's a lot of men that end up actually spending a year with us to go on a complete journey of how they are kind of remaking the structure of who it is that they are to get themselves back, to feel like they really truly have a sense of ownership of this is who I am and I know myself again, and I'm ready to begin to show this and express this out to the world.
So it's exciting to just see, where your whole life has evolved through this, this building this coaching business, then going through this life event where you make a drastic change, and now you're going through this series of helping other men get through similar circumstances that you were battling or grappling with. If you were to kind of close your eyes, look out 10 years, we're 10 years from now, what would be the most surprising thing or what would you be most intrigued to learn about what happened in those 10 years on your journey to the future?
I mean, a place that my head goes first is just, what is it that my children have done? It's probably what drove me the most to do what I'm doing with Man on Fire is not simply my journey, what I've been through and some of the men I've connected to. But to me, it's about how am I helping create a world that I want my son and I want my daughter to grow up in. And so for me, I don't know if I know what it's going to be, but I know that I will look at these next 10 years and be very intrigued by how have my kids done whatever it is that they do, and how has my journey and my willingness to grow and to face the things that I needed to face to become a better man and to help others in that process. How is that in some way helped, shaped, or informed their journey so that they can be more of who they are and they can be freer in who they are?
I love that because we're always doing stuff for our kids, right? We always try to, we always say it, but do we really have the true intention at the end of the day to do things for our kids? And it sounds like
it's a huge driver for me, but it's also the recognition that the most impact that you can have on your kids begins with you having the impact on yourself. We've got to do the work. We've got to set the example. We've got to be that and walk that path for them.
So let me ask you one question before we wrap this up. And that is keeping your kids in mind, Jake and Kate, right? Let's say you and everything that you are, everything that you've done, everything that you have has to be extinguished from the earth. And you're only allowed to leave 3 things behind.
Mm-hmm.
And those could be virtues, those could be philosophy, it could be material items, it could be anything.
Okay.
What would those 3 truths, those 3 things that you would leave behind be for your kids?
I think the first thing would be to leave them the understanding of what it means to be present to our lives. We could always use more presence, meaning to be able to take in the fullness of what any experience is. And that's where that deepest connection and deepest love come when we're in relationship with another person, is from truly being present with them. It's the greatest gift we can ever give. It's also the greatest gift we can ever receive, is being present in the moment. So that's one. 2 would be to feel more. We're consistently pushed towards the idea of feeling less and being less connected. And I go the direct opposite direction now in my life. That was not always the case, as you guys sort of surmised. But it's to feel more and to recognize that if we want to feel more joy, if we want to feel more awe, if we want to feel bliss, then that means we also need to feel the grief, and we need to feel the sadness, and we need to feel the frustration and the anger as well. And we need to do that in healthy ways, but we need to expand the range of what it is that we can feel, because frankly, that's one of the things that's innately human. So let's do it, right?
Yeah.
3rd, a word that I struggled with for a very, very long time: surrender.
Tell me more. Expand on that.
I always thought, that I knew what I was doing, where I was going, that I had it all figured out. And most of the time, even with the best of ideas, I usually was doing nothing more than just getting in my way from what was trying to happen through me in life. And the more that I have let go of that and recognized that at any given time, life is conspiring to return us to a greater sense of fullness and wholeness in who we are. So get out of the way. I love that. We have this idea that, as somebody that goes out and hikes and spends a lot of time outdoors, we have this sense of, I'm going to go out and get out in nature, right? We forget the fact that we are nature. It's not getting in nature. We are nature. And nature, an oak tree, an acorn will be an oak tree. Everything is going to grow into what it naturally was meant to be. Well, let's do ourselves a favor and let's get our egos the hell out of the way, and let's let life come through who we are and surrender to the fact that life has shown us the way.
I love that.
Pay attention.
Now, before we leave, is there anything else that you want our listeners to know about you, or do you want to leave behind for them? Maybe where to find you?
Yeah, I mean, I think
how do we find Men on Fire? How do we find you? How do we make sure we stay in touch with Luke Iorio?
Yeah, best way to do that is to track down Man on Fire, which is Man on Fire Rising. You'll find us on all the socials. We're on all the platforms. manonfirerising.com is the website. You can certainly look me up. You'll find me on all the socials. I'm getting a little bit more active again. There's going to be some more stuff that I'm going to be producing with Man on Fire, which I'm looking forward to. And so that's the best way. Track us down online, follow us, follow me, and reach out to. You like something this episode, something stood out to you, drop me a DM somewhere.
I love this, man. I love this. Thank you so much. I appreciate you. I appreciate everything you do for me. I appreciate everything that you did on this podcast and sharing your story. And that's a wrap, man. Business Unchained.